I generally publish this podcast on Tuesdays. Today I'm breaking protocol, sharing it on a Friday for a bunch of reasons. Last night I recorded a conversation with Jess Serrante, who is a climate activist, a climate leadership coach, and creator of the incredible podcast, We Are the Great Turning. And one of the reasons I love this podcast so much is that it is a complete body of work. It's like a limited series. They did what they were going to do, and then they stopped so you can take it all in and then know that you have it all. And I wanted to talk to Jess. We arranged this well before the 2024 presidential election in the U.S., and we decided not to record the day after, just to give ourselves some time and perspective. But as it turns out, this is just a week later, and these themes were kind of brought up to the country and brought up in relief for the world to see are the essence of the work of the Great Turning, which is to say, and we'll get into this in the conversation, but I just kind of want to frame why this is so urgent for me right now. There's three stories that we can live into right now, that we can believe, that we can see the world through. One is business as usual. Everything's fine. Climate problems, great. We're going to figure out how to suck carbon out of the air. No worries. Capitalist system will figure things out, and the people who come up with the best ideas will be rewarded. All is good. Then there's the story of the Great Unraveling, which is we're doomed. The oceans are dying. There's no more fish. There's poverty everywhere. The climate is collapsing. Everything's on fire. There's oppression and war and degradation, income inequality. Also true. And then there's the third story, the story of the Great Turning, which is what we're going to get into in this conversation. So if you have been in despair and rage, bewilderment, depression, or if you have been in elation, jubilation, or if you're thinking, man, if we could only just get back to where we were, to business as usual, to the normal neoliberal growth economies, this conversation will have something profound to say to you. So let's get into it. Without further ado, Jess Serrante, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're one of the best podcasters I know. So it's very exciting.
Thank you.
So yeah, and that's how I found you, through an email that I got from Animas Institute from Bill Plotkin and Janine Hagen, saying that there's this podcast about the work of Joanna Macy. And I listened to it, and I listened to it again. These days, it feels like it's something that's almost required on repeat, just for, almost like a kind of like emotional, psychological, spiritual dialysis. So I just first of all, I just wanted to thank you for doing the work, and maybe you could begin by just introducing yourself, and then we can get to the Great Turning and Joanna and the bigger issues.
Great. Awesome. It was so kind of Bill to put that in the email thread. I was so grateful when I saw that. So my name is Jess Serrante. I am a climate leadership coach and a podcaster, and I've been working in the climate activism community since 2007. So when I was a college freshman, actually, I took an environmental studies class my freshman year and learned about the climate crisis and all of the environmental crises that we're facing. And from that moment forward, my entire life was about addressing climate change. So I organized through college. I worked for Greenpeace for a couple of years. I worked for another corporate accountability organization called Rainforest Action Network. While I was in that work, I had my first experience of burnout and turned toward coaching and met Joanna and came into the work that I do now, which is more about supporting leaders and activists and helping them to sustain themselves and to find the spiritual fortitude that they need in order to carry on and do this work.
So when you just started talking about you took this freshman course and it lit you up to devote your life to this, the question that came to my mind, which I edited before I blurted it out, is what, like most people, I imagine, took that course or something similar or read about it and don't do anything. Like, what motivated you? And then I'm asking someone like, you just heard that like the ship is sinking. What motivated you to try to patch the like?
Yeah.
I feel like I shouldn't be asking you. I should be asking everybody else like why they didn't do what you did.
Well, so I should edit the story a little bit because, of course, I gave you the Cliffs Notes version. What happened was that I learned about the climate crisis. I was devastated. And then a year later, a group of friends invited me to go to a conference called Power Shift. That was the first US-based youth climate conference. And so I was there. I went down to DC from Vermont, where I was in school, and I was with thousands of other young people, mostly college-age people who were lit up about the same thing and who knew things that I didn't know. Like they knew about organizing and they knew about movement building, and I didn't know that stuff. I mean, of course I had like heard about it through like learning about the civil rights movement and that kind of thing, but like it hadn't occurred to me. No one had really told me that I could organize, that we could build power, that we could sway people, that we actually had influence over this because we all felt so small. And so that was actually the thing that catalyzed me into the rest of my life, was like that moment, being surrounded by the climate movement for the first time and being like, wow,
Yeah.
it's intoxicating. So in many ways, yeah, it's like movement building and community have always been the heart of the work that I do, right? Like I became a coach because of my love for the movement.
Yeah. Well, and I guess community, there's the facts on the ground, right? There's the UN reports we could read and the scientific studies and the polar ice cap data, but it's like community somehow spurs us into identity and action in ways that it's almost more about the emotions and the contagion and the hearts than the fact.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, what are we doing this for if not for our community? Right? I mean, say that as if that's like immediately obvious, right? We live in a culture that thrives on separating. The global corporate capitalism paradigm needs us to be separate in order to make money off of us. But the reality, of course, is that we're all inherently intertwined,
Hmm.
not separate in any way. And so, I mean, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here because we're going to talk about the work that reconnects, but in many ways, this is what this work is about. This is one of the things that Joanna has taught me, and one of the reasons why I have taken on carrying her work with the fervor that I have is because I do believe that when we remember the reality that we are inextricably linked parts of a community, not just our local, but our global community, then we are so much more motivated to act in service of the collective good, to move beyond the fears or the like more selfish motivations, right? And I don't mean to necessarily shame that. We all have that self-preservation for a reason, but we can move beyond the things that we've been taught we need to do, or we had the ways we're supposed to get by in this life, and learn that we can lean on community and how beautiful life is when we act in service of that.
Yeah. See, there's part of my brain going, as a behavioral scientist, like, yeah, but our minds are not set up for collectivism. Our minds are set up where there's threats to separate into us and them, to be tribal. And then at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, in Spain where I live, we've had these tragic floods over the last couple of weeks. The government completely fell down, and you see people from all over the country like driving their farm tractors and their trucks and bringing water and like there is this impulse to help people you don't know,
Yeah.
and it's almost like that's as natural as just reading it in the paper and then going back to Wordle.
Yeah, I mean, I'm tempted here to like turn the question back to you and be like, you studied this. Like, is that really true? That that it's just as natural for us or more natural for us to like turn in, because that hasn't been my experience of life. And maybe it's because of the people that I surround myself with, but I also think it's very natural for us to turn toward one another, especially when we have fewer resources, right? One of the things that isolates us also in our culture is wealth, right? You can afford to buy your way through your problems, through your illness, your need for childcare, whatever. When you can't do that, you need other people. You need the village.
Yeah. I mean, the best answer I can come up with is, have you heard of Rat Park? So I'm going to lose all the details because it's a couple of years back, but some social scientists, some scientists, behaviorists were studying about like stress and addiction. So they'd get rats addicted, or they do the shocks, or they give them food, and and the rats would get addicted to pushing the button for cocaine, or they'd feel the shock, right? And it was predictable, like, oh, this is how rats are. Except in one lab, instead of separating the rats in their own cages, they had Rat Park, and they had all the rats together, and they had rat games and rat mazes and things. And they found that those rats didn't get addicted, and they didn't exhibit weird behavior. And it turns like, oh, when you study like who we are depends on the systems that we live in.
Yeah. That's a cool example.
So like if you the work you do around community, like, and I want to get into this, like, I've been in situations where a bunch of strangers are together and someone knows how to weave them together, and all of a sudden hearts just open. It's not an effort.
Yeah. We're all hungry for it, right? It's amazing. I mean, I think that hunger is like what the work that Reconnects runs on. All it takes, it's so much simpler than it might even look from the outside, like to facilitate this work. It's just an invitation. There's not like we're not going into the room telling people how to open up. We're just, in the simplest form, we're saying, you're invited to tell this person what it is that you love about being alive on Earth, or what breaks your heart about this moment, or what it is that you long to do in service of our planet. And like to have an attentive, ready person sitting in front of you to hear your answers to those questions, it just pours open.
I can feel it. I can feel my own flowering as you just offer those into the ether.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how bad it feels to try to answer that by myself.
Yeah.
How constricted. Like this would be like, this is like a terrible like self-study program. Like, write the answer to these questions. Like, yeah, and we can do it, and we can reflect, but it's climbing uphill.
I mean, it's nice to be self-reflective, right? But like, again, the pain, the thing that has us shut down or not offer ourselves or stay inside, is often the pain of separation, isolation, and the destruction of our world. So of course, the antidote is in coming together and in experiencing ourselves as a part of a collective, because that's the truest truth about who we are. Right. And I mean, and it's a labor in this culture. It's a labor to remember that. It's like the webs just like reform. Every time I remember, the webs like will reform over my eyes and I have to peel them back. And over time it gets easier. But still, like, our culture has done such a good job, horrifically good job, at training us into believing in that separateness.
I was just before this call, I was coaching a client. He's an entrepreneur, and he's very clear, like the startup he's creating is in the service of him learning leadership and learning problem solving, and he like remembers that, and he says, I keep forgetting. Like I'll wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh, what do I got to do today? And like it's so hard to remember those big the heart stuff when you're not in community.
Yeah.
It's almost like trying to keep a human cell alive in a petri dish. It's a hell of a lot easier if it's in my body.
Yeah. Yeah. Joanna calls that a cultural amnesia.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
then,
this work is at its heart a culture work, you know?
yeah. So I want to make sure I set up the work that reconnects with
Let's tell people first.
through your story. And you mentioned burnout, and I know from listening to We Are the Great Turning that you have a story of throwing yourself into the climate movement.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you met these people who understood movement building and activism, and I was thinking like, but do we really have any good like stories like when has it succeeded, like where, and you were doing a bunch of stuff. Can kind of continue your story?
What particular part of it would it help to hear?
Well, maybe the you know the burnout, the right, because I think a lot of people are like, well, I would do something, but either I've already tried things and I've burnt out on it, and I'm so exhausted and I haven't taken care of myself, or I don't see a way to win, and so why am I going to put energy into a black hole?
Okay, so there's a couple ways. There's like my mind's going in all these different directions around this. I don't know that my burnout story is going to be the most useful for this actually, because I was burning out from years and years of corporate accountability campaigning. Well, maybe it's related, right? Like I had spent when I got activated as a college student, I joined Greenpeace as a student leader. And so I spent a semester in San Francisco learning the ins and outs of organizing from the campaigners and the staff at the Greenpeace office. I then ran campaigns on my campus. I then worked on a nuclear campaign that was
And what does that mean? What is that? What's like? Give us a
running.
visual for running a
So yeah,
campaign.
to get really specific, we were running the first campaign I ever ran was uh a campaign. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I can't remember. But it was called Clear Cut. And Greenpeace was trying to get Kimberly-Clark Corporation, the paper company, to stop sourcing old growth forests in their toilet paper. And so one of the ways that they were doing that was that they were mobilizing college activists from around the country to get their universities to drop their contract with Kimberly-Clark. And so we were one of the universities that did that. We met with the administration. We did like creative actions. We dropped a banner off of one of the student buildings at one point with a big picture of the Lorax, mobilized a bunch of students, and we got the university to agree to it. And what was beautiful is that as a result of that, and a handful of other universities across the country doing that in that same couple years, they were able to tip the company. So oftentimes this is how these big corporate accountability campaigns work, right? It's like multiple mini campaigns that build enough pressure on a mega corporation that they start to see and feel the threat on their bottom line, and then they change their policies. So
Okay.
the thing I was doing when I burned out, when I found Joanna, was a similar campaign. I was working to transform the global palm oil industry. And so I was a part of an organization that was a part of a coalition. So we were taking on the food industry, and we were taking on these big food corporations, Kellogg's, Pepsi, Campbell's, Krispy Kreme, you name it, and pushing them to change their palm oil procurement policy, because the way that the palm oil was being procured was destroying forests in Indonesia, rising and supporting slave labor in Indonesia and Malaysia, and so on. So, I mean, I was lucky because I aligned myself pretty early with organizations that were really good at winning campaigns.
Mhm.
You know, like it was intoxicating, very, very powerful to be like, this whole team of us might spend years and years of our lives pushing against this, but we shifted the food sector. And so for years, starting in college, my dream job was to be a corporate accountability campaigner. But then at some point, I realized that changing these corporations wasn't actually what my life was for. And when that happened, I felt like I'd lost everything. I didn't know where my purpose was. I was like, I know that this isn't it anymore, even though for like 8 or so years I thought it was.
And can I ask what, like, was it that you were winning, but it wasn't making a difference, or there was like, what was not right about it for you?
I think after years of working in that, was it moving these big corporations makes a tangible difference, but I felt like it was still operating within the business as usual paradigm. Like it was like I was devoting my life to improving a corporation. I mean, and that's obviously not exactly what it is, right? It's like we're protecting forests. We're saving the lives of people who are in forced labor conditions. We're not saving them, but like changing the conditions that would harm these people's lives. That's meaningful and tangible, but I wanted larger paradigm cultural change. I
Hmm.
didn't know that at the time. I can say that now because it's where I've landed,
Yeah.
that doing the spiritual cultural work of this is what has really taken my heart. But at the time, I just knew in my gut that that wasn't the work for me anymore. I had to go out looking for something else.
Gotcha. Well, it's almost like you're just pushing the same levers that the world pushes on corporations, right? Like profit. Like, oh,
Hmm.
we're gonna make less money on college campuses, or we're gonna get bad press. So it's just easier, our share to be good to our shareholders.
Right.
We're
Right.
gonna
And for
do
me,
this.
it was like I don't want a better PepsiCo. I want a paradigm where there aren't mega corporations who have vested interest in like violating and destroying life in service of their bottom line. That's the world I want to live in. And it's like lofty. It's bigger. It's a bigger, it's not an easy win in the same way, but that was what I had to move toward.
Yeah. And I guess there are multiple lanes. Right? I saw a meme recently, like there's many lanes of resistance.
Yes,
And like, I'm glad there are people doing corporate accountability,
absolutely.
right?
So,
And I'm glad there are people who've moved on, who are looking at it from this sort of post-capitalist, a world that actually nourishes us
yeah.
perspective.
So we haven't gotten into the nuances of what the Great Turning is, but I'll say that the Great Turning, the podcast is called We Are the Great Turning, is the term that we use to describe the global paradigm shift that's happening toward a just and life-sustaining society. And within the Great Turning, there are multiple kinds of work. So one of the aspects of the Great Turning we call holding actions, like the actions that are stemming harm, that are protecting what can still be protected. But if we just do that, then we're just going to be putting out fires, right? And we're not actually we're not going upstream and changing the root cause. So the other parts of the Great Turning are also building new ways of living, right? Like building ways of feeding people that don't require us to decimate ecosystems. And then also a shift in consciousness, learning to see the world and understand ourselves as a part of a whole so that like we can sustain ways of living that are rooted in like sustenance and justice as opposed to destruction and isolation.
Yeah, and man, just hearing that phrase, like a just and life-sustaining society, and realizing like how far we are from it, and how
Yeah.
easy it is not to notice.
What do you mean easy to not notice?
Like, this is how things are. Like, you know, a better Pepsi Co. Like, you know, I, like Nestle, like, stop giving the formula, just make chocolate. Like, it's like the status quo has seemed from almost all my life to be doing good things, moving in right directions. And only in the last, I mean, for me, I think I've seen it for longer than a lot of people, but I think societally, everyone's going, no, this is all broken. Right. Because, interestingly, I have been in communication with people from the other side since the election. And the people who are like, don't call me a racist stooge for thinking that, like they think the same way I do at a really fundamental level, like something's broken and they have a different information ecosystem, but the fundamental feeling, the looking around and seeing this isn't working, I feel like 99% of the country voted for that. Something's not working. We need something else.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, so I come from a family where the vast majority of my family members supported Trump. So I've had, and we've had these political differences for a very long time. So I also, get to have these conversations with my parents. And one of the things that I've found, particularly in conversation with my dad about this, because he and I talk about politics a lot, for better and for worse, is that we agree that things are not working. We agree that the system is corrupted, that it's not serving people. Some of the things that we don't agree on are like where the flaws are in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like he's still very invested in the global corporate capitalism paradigm. This is the place where we meet the most tension.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's
Yeah.
a businessman and it's part of his identity and it's a part of his experience of the world and how he provides for his family, right? One of the ways that he loves me is through his participation in this system. So when I call that into question, it's incredibly painful. But this is why I think the culture work is so important, right? Because I know that my father, who's now voted for Trump 3 times, has the biggest heart and wants a just world, right? When we get down to that, has beautiful grandchildren who he lives for, who he couldn't imagine a world being unsafe for them,
Mm-hmm.
But how we get to that safety, what the paradigm is, right? I see that paradigm as more responding to chaos through more control.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
where safety comes from in his perspective. Versus for me, I'm a little more comfortable with chaos, and I'm willing to gamble, to trust that collective well-being and collective care and a more like social collective way of organizing society will lead to more safety. But I also can see why someone who comes from an isolating paradigm wouldn't trust that, right?
Yeah.
This is why
Yeah.
this matters.
And I love how you sort of nimbly went from the word gamble to the word trust. It's
Mm.
like they're so different and yet they look the same.
Cool. Yeah.
So I want to share, like, there's a bunch of people that I've been following for a while since I got radicalized about like the world as it isn't, like this, we're not going to fix this incrementally. And I follow a lot of people. Yeah.
We're making
Many of whom have been posting since the election or even, just before, just like recognizing or thinking that Trump was going to win, saying, this is all good. We're burning the system down. It couldn't happen fast enough. Like, this is it's all going to collapse. And they're like really happy about it. And I'd like to kind of offer that because like these are the people that I have been following. And I'd like to offer the Great Turning as Like maybe you could talk about like the three paradigms and why what the Great Turning offers.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, so let's talk about the three stories of our time. This is a piece of the framework of the work that reconnects, the body of work of my teacher, Joanna Macy. And there are three stories that we can tell about this moment. So the first, we've been talking about all three of them for whatever it's worth, right? And anyone listening is going to inherently recognize these stories. The first we call business as usual. This is the global corporate capitalism paradigm. This is, it's status quo economics, it's growth oriented, it's, the idea that like any bump we hit, like when we hit the pandemic, right? It's not a symptom of a larger problem. It's just a bump that we need to navigate and that the economy can benefit from as well as recover from.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the story of our society that we're told through a lot of mainstream media, through business schools and that kind of thing.
All right. From people who are doing fine, largely.
Or I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably people who suffer from this system who also don't see outside of it, who believe that like they just need to climb the ladder, right? They just need to play the game better.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's the first story. And it's for many of us, and for me certainly, it's the first story that I was told about our society. The second story is the story told by those of us who see that and see the destruction that it's wreaking on our planet. Right? And we call this story the Great Unraveling. So this is the story where we see the corruption of the big pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies, and we see that the medical industry is like broken and harming people, and the ice caps are melting, and income inequality is growing, and isolation is growing, and authoritarianism is on the rise globally, and shit, like things are falling apart. And this story is also true. It's happening, right? So the Great Turning, which we've already been talking about, is the story told by those of us who see that and don't want it to have the last word about who we are as humans on this planet. And that's the story of a transition toward a more just and life-sustaining way of living. And this is, it's in local food systems, it's in mutual aid networks, it's in restorative justice and abolition work. It's all of the efforts that we make to build the version of the world that we want to live in. So the important thing about all three of these stories is that they're all happening simultaneously. It's not like we have to pick one. We have to like put our vote on like which one of these things is true. They're all true. But for those of us who see the possibility of the Great Turning and who like hunger for it, we have the opportunity, the invitation to choose to dedicate ourselves, right? And that's hard work because of the web, the like cultural amnesia we were talking about before, right? The stories of the unraveling and business as usual are incredibly seductive.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
want us, those stories, those paradigms want us to believe that the Great Turning isn't possible.
Yeah. I never thought about it before, but both of those are stories that invite apathy. Right. Nothing's wrong. Nothing to see here. Move along, or we're fucked.
It's fair.
So why bother? And you're
Yeah.
saying that there's a story in which action and the word hope is a very loaded, fraught, ambiguous word in the Great Turning community. And I love the metaphor that you guys used in the podcast about like the soccer game. Like you're not expand on that because you did it so well.
Yeah. The way we put it is it's not like deciding betting on which team you think is going to win a soccer game, right? It's not like this is the team I think is going to win. It's about choosing the team that you want to win and getting out onto the field, being an active part of it. That's the only way we build and grow the Great Turning. It's here. We need it to be bigger. We need to amplify it. We need it to gain cultural strength, because right now we really are staring down the barrel of some incredible dangers, right? And so it takes a lot of spiritual fortitude to have, and courage to say, you know what, rather than sitting here being like, I'm putting my money on apocalypse. It's a lot easier to do that, right? And people will protect themselves by being like, well, it's too far gone. It's too late. I can't do anything. I don't actually have any power. But to have the courage to say, you know what, I'm going to live my life in service of the possibility that I want. That's the best I have to offer. Out of my own life, to my children, to future generations, to this planet that has held me and nourished me my entire life, I'm going to offer myself to this great turning.
So you said it's here,
The great
right?
turning?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's here.
It's like I have a friend, Sophie Kranz, who's a global strategist and consultant, and one of the things that she's always talking about is like, stop using tech bro examples in your case studies of entrepreneurship and innovation. Look instead at what's happening, around well digging in Uganda, or like there's people all over the world. There's more stories than we could count, but they don't make the news. They're not like, so, when you say it's already here, it's almost like we don't see it because we're not looking for it.
And I would say that, like, once you start looking for it, you will see it everywhere. It's like, it lives in every moment of kindness and generosity and service to something beyond oneself that you see.
Hmm.
It's like, I just got this image. I used to live in New York City. And one of the things that I used to love, like in the subway, is this moment where you really get to like feel the like density of the city, everybody moving so quickly. But something I always loved is like, there's people carrying their groceries and carrying baby strollers. And like people will, like, and this is also a very New York thing, but like people will like leave their headphones in, but they'll just be like, you want me to grab that? And they just like grab the bottom of the stroller and walk to the top of the stairs. And it's like,
Uh-huh.
all right, see you later. They don't want anything for it. It's just like we help each other. So
Yeah.
I just got this, like, people carrying a baby stroller up the subway stairs together. It's like we just kick in to help each other get by.
Hmm.
And of
Yeah, it
course,
is.
it's more than just getting by. It's also about thriving. But it lives in every act of generosity.
It's so funny that you choose that as an example, because it's an impulse.
Mhm.
It's an instinct, but it's also mediated by no commitment, no reciprocity, no entanglement.
There's no right. I think that's kind of why I love that image.
Right?
And I
Like
mean,
it's much harder.
entanglement. It's like, imagine this place if we didn't do that for each other.
Yeah. 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 It's like one of my favorite, I don't even know where it's from, but it's sort of part of my Jewish heritage, a story about someone dies and is going to, they get to choose whether they go to heaven or hell. And they said, I want to see hell. He says, you're going to heaven. But he says, out of curiosity, I want to see hell. And hell is this big banquet table and nobody has elbows. And they're all trying to feed themselves. And they can't get the food close to their mouth. And he says, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's terrible. Then it goes, all right, now take me to heaven. Exactly the same thing, but they're feeding each other.
Mm-hmm. I love that story. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I love that you say we can find it in these like very human moments that aren't You wouldn't look at someone helping someone carry a stroller upstairs and say, oh, they're fighting the climate crisis or they're fighting poverty. Like it might be like a Wall Street tycoon who's going to go to work at Goldman Sachs and, issue a bond that's going to lead to drilling somewhere.
Yeah.
But so how do we translate those impulses and like tell people like that's the great turning and there's more?
I mean, and there's more, right? It's not. I think part of what I meant by offering that example is that, like, I think generosity and kindness are at the root of the cultural change that we need, right? Like, we need cultural transformations that are reflections of that kind of let's help each other get by in this life that is hard enough as it is. Let's help each other live well, right? Like, that can be, I grow food for you and I never meet you,
Mm-hmm.
right? It can be, I help mediate conflict that unmediated might turn to gun violence. You'll never know. But it's one making the place that we live, making the communities that we live in places that are more generous. It could be making art. I've been saying recently that more and more I believe there is no great turning without art.
Mm.
Because the great turning is about creating a world that is beautiful. Or letting our world be beautiful is another way we could look at it, right? But the creative impulse of humans, the desire to write songs that are about love and justice, and to make visual art that moves people deeply, like that is also a piece of a just, sustaining society. And none of us can do it all, right? I think that's another thing. One of the things I'm there's a lot of inherent contradiction for us. One of the things that's very difficult about this time for us is that we have the astounding task of living in all three paradigms simultaneously in a big way, right? Like we still need to pay rent,
Mm-hmm.
right? We need to put food on the table and clothes on our children and, and like buy the medicine and whatever. And that requires some level of cooperation with the business as usual paradigm. So the fact that we do that doesn't inherently mean that we're against the other ones, right? It's like we make the best choices that we can in service of the outcome that we want. It's like sweet. I mean, or it's like well-intentioned, I think is the better way to put it. The way that the environmental movement has often pointed us toward this is a very American answer to an environmental crisis to about conscious capitalism or conscious consumerism, right? The way I'm going to deal with the climate crisis is I'm going to buy local organic produce. Like that's certainly a part of it. But not everybody can afford to do that. And that in itself doesn't make the world that we want, right? So we have to be able to like navigate the complexity and the imperfection and the uncertainty of aligning ourselves as best as we can with the outcomes that we want and inviting everybody else to do their best too.
Yeah, this reminds me, like you've talked about there's a lot of inner work that needs to happen. It seems like this is like I make all those compromises and there's a voice inside me that just wants to beat me up and call me a hypocrite. Right? Like, am I really serious? And look at your life, and you've talked a big game, but you've never put yourself on the line. And to some extent, that's a welcome voice because it's true, right? And it's challenging me to play bigger. But in another sense, it's pushing me down, and it's making it's giving me less energy, less joy, less kindness and generosity to go around.
Yeah. I think this is a part of why I turned toward coaching. That like there's no like life is inherently messy and nonlinear, and everybody's path is going to be different. But the place that my practice as a coach and as a facilitator is dedicated to is helping people to find the place that is their most generous offering that is still within their capacity. Right? Because sometimes I often work with young climate leaders, and I'm walking them back from burnout. They're giving either too much, or they're giving without taking care of themselves, or they're working in ways that are exhausting them, right? That's one end of the spectrum. And with those people, they're so all in service of the outcome that they want, that it's about, hey, fill your cup, take care of the little piece of earth that is you now. And then for some, it's like, you are a person with resources and skills, and like, how can you mobilize those more generously? What would be a stretch? What would be like a little, still safe, but like a little uncomfortable, where you're gonna like go out and be in community, or you're gonna go step out and do direct action and put your body on the line and be a part of a resistance in that way, or volunteer your time in service of something in your community that matters to you. So it's like, it's different for all of us, but I believe that there is a sweet spot that is our ultimate, that is like an expression of our gifts and our generosity and our courage, and like being the version of ourselves that is like truly a part of community, or daring to try to be a part of community, right? Because I think for those of us who feel isolated, it can also feel really scary. Like, I don't trust that there's anyone else out there that's really with me, So it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I was just thinking as you're saying that is, going back to this idea of community, that it's we give courage to each other. Like, what feels like a huge risk, after the first person takes it, is less of a risk, or maybe feels like less of a risk. And so we can encourage each other in little ways that, that iteratively kind of polish the edges of what look like things that are, going to cut us if we touch them, to realize that maybe there's more benefit here and less cost than we thought.
Yeah. Yeah. And being willing, like, going back to gamble and trust, right? Like, if you don't inherently trust that, like, take a step out and see what you find. It requires vulnerability to find ourselves in the place of community that we long for.
So, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you, just for, get some free coaching, was around like the fear that I feel individually just about living on this earth, making enough money, supporting my family, and how, when I look at like what I have in the bank, it's not rational to be so as worried as I am, and yet it feels so real. And I was going to ask you about that, but I think the answer you're going to say is like, in community, like, of course I'm going to be insane as an individual, right? Like the rat in their own little cage.
Well, it's like, what are you investing in? What is your, if you're it, like the reality, I think everything that you just said makes so much sense, right? Like, part of the devastating nature of this moment is like, we have destabilized ourselves. We have made it so that water will be harder to find, food will be harder to find, right? Like, shelter, meeting our basic needs is harder because we have destroyed the planet that provided and still provides, but like, we have really harmed our planet's capacity to provide for us in the way she always has, because we've taken more than we've given over so many years. So there's an answer to that, which is rooted in the same paradigm that created that problem, which is, let me continue to accrue and hold on to resources. I will find safety by having more money, having more resources, and that will be the thing that protects me and mine from the destabilization that we've created. Now, I understand that and I feel that. I actually was just having a conversation like yesterday with a dear friend about the fears of like deaccumulation and what it would be to like give away what it is to give away resources. But I think the paradigm shift, and the one that I'm actively in as well, is about like reorienting the way that I think about what my insurance policy is. Like, what do I really want to be held by? Do I want an individual solution to a destabilized world, or do I want a collective solution?
Mm-hmm.
I believe in the collective, right? So redistributing resources in a way that make my community a healthier place is actually a really good investment, for lack of a better term.
Mm. It's almost like, yeah.
Is saying like, actually, the asset that I need in the long term is people, and people with many different kinds of skills, and people who I trust, so that as things continue to destabilize, which I think they likely will over the course of our lifetimes, I have the safety in a network. And I'll speak for myself, it's so much more beautiful than a bank account.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about a friend of mine I've had on the podcast a couple of times, Tyson Yunkaporta from Australia.
Yeah.
And, he's kind of making fun of me because like before COVID, I was already sort of into prepping. Like I had 2 freezers, and he's like, real prepping is, it's storing your wealth in your neighbor's bellies.
Yeah.
Like that's prepping.
Yes. He's got such a way with words. My gosh. And listen to that man talk forever. Yeah. That's beautiful.
I'm looking at the notes that I made about wanting to covering a lot of it. Oh, it's the one thing. So I'm encountering a lot of what I consider to be magical thinking these days, and some of it I'm encountering in my own head.
Yeah.
Like thinking that they're going to discover that the votes were all wrong, or the people that I think are evil are actually sneakily being good, or like, or that the aliens are about to land. Like there was actually like yesterday, there was a congressional hearing on UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena. And like, these 4-star generals are like, no, we have the biologics of the, like, okay, now's the time, guys. Like,
if you've been waiting for the right moment, we could use you now, benevolent aliens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. And at this point, like, I honestly don't know what's magical thinking and what's just like everything's up in the air. But I feel that there is a danger of looking at story 2 and then totally bypassing that reality into the Great Turning. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So this is where the entire rest of the model of the work that Reconnects comes in. So the framework of the work that Reconnects follows a spiral. That's like our structure. And there's 4 stages of the spiral. So in practice and in community, we do exercises and have conversations that follow each of these 4 stages that sort of very naturally lead into one another. So the first is gratitude. We ground in gratitude because that gives us the strength and resilience that we need to, well, first of all, just be grateful to be alive on Earth. And it also gives us the courage and the fortitude that we need in order to go into the second stage of the spiral, which is honoring our pain for the world. And honoring our pain for the world is about being with the hard feelings that come up for us around what is occurring on our planet. So it's our fear, our rage, our grief, and it's also our emptiness, our numbness, right, which is increasingly a common response for people in the like modern social media, internet bombarded society, right? That we just can't even feel it. It's true for me, and it's true for many of my friends. And when we honor those feelings, like really visit them and speak the truth of, I'm really afraid, like I'm afraid this is going to happen, or I'm so angry that this is unfolding in this way. My heart breaks when I see a houseless person on the street in front of my house and I don't know how to help, or whatever, that when we speak that, it naturally begins to free us. It begins to alchemize, and it brings us deeper into what we call the third stage of the spiral, which we call seeing with new eyes. And some people call it seeing with new and ancient eyes, which I really love because it's about a fresh perspective that is, often one that our ancestors held, that is the understanding of our entwinement, the ways that we are inextricably linked on this planet. And it's also about seeing with more clarity, like divesting ourselves from the dominant paradigm, right? When I grieve the absolute horrific violence of the carceral system, right? Then I can allow myself to really hold the mission of abolition in my heart more dearly, that I can see the prison system for the violent, destructive, oppressive force that it really is, even though it paints itself as a system that is invested in public safety, right? That's a paradigm that I had to shift over time, just to give an example, because I was told growing up, especially as a white woman, that system was in place to protect me. So seeing with new eyes allows me to see my oneness and divest from those dominant systems. And naturally, when we do that, the impulse that rises in us is to act. And the fourth stage of the spiral is going forth. It's taking action in service of the world. It's embodying the love, being brave, reaching out, being in community, being generous in all the ways that we've talked about. So this spiral exists because we need it to continue to alchemize the heartbreak of what it is to be alive, right? Without it, we'll go back. The webs will reform and we'll stay in there. But this is a way of continuously liberating ourselves from the amnesia, from the, I'm looking for a word and I'm not finding it, but our participation in the dominant paradigm, shifting our allegiance to the great turning.
Yeah. So yesterday I ran a call for people in my network offering, I called it What Now? And it's just sort of an exploration. And I kind of worked out an agenda for it. And then 2 minutes before it started, I thought about you and Joanna, and I put in bullet point gratitude. And it was really hard because no one wanted to start there. So I'm so I was I don't know what I'm grateful for. So I'm like, how about this breath? And there's I was just shamelessly stealing from you guys.
Please, it's not ours.
It's
ours, all of ours.
Yeah. I don't know, and in some ways it would have felt like I was meeting them better, the 5 or 6 people who did show up, if we had just started with number 2, with the pain, and because that's what they wanted to talk about and that's where they wanted to go. And I don't know that I did a great job of introducing. I mean, it was just a couple of minutes before, but I'm oh, we got to do this first, because I don't know when it's going to come back in, when we're going to have the chance. But it feels like starting with gratitude is a bit of a provocation.
Say more.
Well, it's I don't wanna. I'm here because everything's shit.
Yeah. Right. To which you say, and is there anything that's worth being grateful for? Is there anything that you love that's the reason? It's the reason we're heartbroken, right? Joanna says our pain is the other side of the coin of our love for the world. We're only heartbroken in whatever way it looks like, right? If it's irritation, if it's anger, if it's fuck this shutdown numbness, all of that is because what we love is being assaulted. So I get it. I get that and I love the word provocation. Because it's like, let's irritate our own cynicism.
Wow.
Like, as a facilitator, I feel so excited that you got people to that point, because it's like when that kind of resistance comes up, you know you've done something. You know you've activated something inside them.
Yeah, I love this. It's like almost like the gratitude and the steps 1 and 3. So the gratitude and seeing with these new and ancient eyes the possibility are sort of magnetically created by the pain.
Yeah, it's all, I mean, it's really all connected. It's all entwined. And one of the things I love about the fact that it's a spiral, it's just the fact that like these things, they naturally feed into one another. Right? That we are grateful. You could even say like gratitude is another word for love, right? Like I am grateful for my niece, who is like one of the great loves of my life. She's 4 years old. I'm just obsessed. So, I mean, tears in my eyes the second I even invoke her, right? Like so in love with this child. So grateful for the gift of having her in my life. And on the tail of naming my adoration for this 4-year-old is my absolute fear for the world that she's inheriting. My grief that she won't get to see coral reefs like the ones that I got to see going on vacation with my family when I was a child, or that she won't have the, 4 feet of snow winters that I grew up having, digging holes, in New Jersey. Like some of my favorite memories of my own childhood. Like
You had 4 feet of snow in New Jersey?
There were moments. Okay, one of my favorite moments of my entire childhood. We had this picture window in our living room. That was like maybe 1.5 feet off the ground. It was just this big window, and it was like all this. Okay, maybe we didn't have 4 feet, but it got pushed up against the window, so we built a tunnel, and we lived in this. We hung a little igloo where we could knock on the window and wave at our parents, and it was one of my favorite childhood memories. Right, and like, I can't remember the last time I went home for Christmas and there was any significant amount of snow on the ground. I haven't lived in a while, but I go back every year. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess one of the gifts of the work that reconnects is the structure, right? Because all this, the gratitude, the love, the vision, the pain, the rage, it's like it's like trying to eat, all the meals in one. Like let's throw in the brownie and the salad and the stew, and it's amorphous and gross, and we don't know what to do with it. You're almost saying like there's a recipe that we can have it all. We're not trying to, like, one of the most beautiful parts of the podcast was when Joanna is just raging against the Biden administration for allowing drilling. Like, no, Joanna, you're a Buddhist teacher. You shouldn't, you shouldn't be mad. And she's like modeling this rage, and then, not effortlessly, but inevitably comes back to love.
Yeah. Yeah. Always. I mean, she's a rebel in that way, right? She is different than a lot of Buddhist teachers in that way. And I love, one of the things I love so much about her is how fervently she loves this world. That she's not worried about fitting into scripts. She's not worried about doing it right. She's going to be real about what is up. And it's so relatable. A thing that it's infectious too. This is one of the things that I've learned for myself following her and now carrying her work. I now get the experience of moving through the world in a way that, like, as I carry this work with me, I incite these these incredible conversations and experiences with people around me because we're all hungry for it.
Yeah, and gosh, I think like I'm just an ordinary guy, but that's all it takes, right? Like I kind of put her on a pedestal, from afar,
Yeah.
and yet she's like I was actually listening. I remember where I was walking when I was listening to that part about how fiercely and deeply she loves the world and is in love with the world, and I'm like, oh, I would like that. I don't have it, so I have to manufacture something else in order to be like her. And yet maybe I didn't get it from the podcast, but I'm getting it more from this, and I'm getting it when I think about the equivalent of your niece in my life.
Yeah.
It's like it might not be everything. It might not be every person. It might not be the kebab restaurant. It might not be the rocks on the beach, but there are things.
Yeah. Yeah. And we start there, right? Start with what is easy to love. And I also think that like when we endeavor to see beauty and to find love in the world, it grows. To whatever extent you're motivated to do that, right? I'm not saying that we should all try to love all of it. That's for the enlightened ones, maybe.
I'm glad to hear that's not a punch.
It's not a yeah. It's I mean, what each of us loves is enough, right? It's enough to move us, right? Like if all there was Joey, that would be my niece. That would be
Huh. Yeah. Yeah.
if I needed a singular motivation, you know?
Well, Mary Oliver is floating into my mind. One of her most famous lines: you don't have to be good. You don't have to crawl through the desert for 100 miles repenting. You just have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves.
Mm-hmm.
Start there. Wow.
Yep.
I've just
Yeah.
heard that poem with
Like,
new ears.
remember the next line. Tell me about despair, yours, and I'll tell you mine.
Ooh. Well, I've been quoting out of context. That's
Right?
awesome.
Actually it follows the spiral if you think about it. Next line it's something about the soft pebbles of the rain falling, right? And the wild geese, harsh and exciting. There is like a seeing with new eyes, seeing with the world of I've never considered that about that poem until this.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow. Hey, I promised an hour and I've taken more than that. I want to just it's almost my bedtime. So I'm I'm bailing a little bit, but I want to make sure people know how to follow you and for folks who should hire you. Like to let like who is like what are they thinking right now? Who are they who should call, give Jess Serrante a call and have her on your team?
Great. Who are the people that should reach out to me?
Yeah. I mean, everybody should listen to the podcast. So maybe talk about the podcast, your website, and then a little bit about your practice.
Perfect. Okay. So the podcast again is called We Are the Great Turning, and you can find it on Spotify, on Apple Music, on YouTube. You can go to wearethegreatturning.com. It should be easy to find. And you can also just put my name in, Jess Serrante, or Joanna's name, and it'll come up. If you are excited about what you hear and you're inspired by this conversation and you want to have conversations like this about these things with the people in your life, which I really hope you do, because I really believe that these kinds of conversations are an essential part of the cultural change that we need. There is a toolkit on the website at wearethegreatturning.com that has resources and question prompts and exercises for every single episode of the podcast. There's also 8 bonus episodes that are facilitated exercises. So you can press play while you're sitting in the room with someone and you can have a Work That Reconnects style conversation or do an exercise together. So we built it out so that you could really practice and bring this work into your life. So that's the podcast. If you're interested in more about what I'm up to, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm at Jess_Serrante, or you can go to sign up for my newsletter at jessserrante.com/subscribe. And that's the best place for you to find out what I'm offering. I'm currently cooking up a bunch of things for 2025. I'll be offering some local workshops here in the Bay Area. I'll be offering an online group program for leaders in the Great Turning to build community and learn together and get coaching on your work. I'll also be offering some retreats. So go find me in those places and you'll be sure to get the updates.
Awesome. Awesome. And who should call you tomorrow to work with you?
Leaders in the Great Turning. If your work is about ushering in this new paradigm, this new just and life-sustaining world, and you are looking for help to bring a project to life, you're looking for support to sustain yourself better in the great work that you're already doing, those are the kinds of folks that I love to work with one-on-one. And I do have some, I have fewer than I used to, but I do still have some one-on-one coaching spots. Yeah.
Jess Serrante, thank you so much. I have been looking forward to this conversation since I found We Are the Great Turning. I've been really looking forward to it since I saw the results of the election.
Yeah. The timing. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Been a really sweet conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Let's keep the spiral going.
And on it turns. All right. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Be well.
And that's a wrap. Find the show notes, plantyourself.com/610, 610. Movement news. Got a couple of tournaments coming up in the next few days. Got a all-day league, Catalonian League Ultimate Beach Tournament on Sunday, all day. And then Monday, very exciting, I'm playing in my first sanctioned paddle tournament. If you don't know what paddle is, go on YouTube and look for PADEL. It's kind of a weird sport. It's sort of tennis-y. It's sort of racquetball-y or squashy. It's played on a small tennis court with glass walls around the back sides. And it's good because, you know, if you miss the ball, it just bounces off the wall and comes back to you. So it's good for aging athletes. And my friend Adam and I are entered into this league. And so for the first time, I'm going to be sort of ranked and measured and have a sense of where I stand, and looking forward to all that. Otherwise, just doing my workouts on the beach, adding in some runs on other days. And I discovered that someone I've known for a long time in a very casual sense, and I think we did some interviews and maybe talked business like 15 years ago. Lucas Rockwood is in Barcelona, not too far from me. He is the founder of yogabody.com, and I rediscovered him when I was looking for ways to fix my tight back, hips, hamstrings, legs, everything, pretty much everything. I think the one thing I can still do, I can still touch my shoulder blades, my elbows, not quite used to, but everything else is tight as hell. And so I'm hoping that Lucas and his program, The Science of Stretching, which I'm now doing religiously, 15 to 20 minutes every morning, is going to help me get my mobility back. That's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends.